Kathleen Gillen, and I am the program coordinator at America's Unofficial Ambassadors. And this session is instructional best practices and lesson planning. We were actually planning to do it in a webinar format, but due to some technical glitches and some glitches with the audio, we were actually unable to complete the session. So I am recording this for everybody. I'm going to go through how to essentially plan and some tips for classroom management. So if you have any questions after you receive this video, feel free to reach out to me. Anything. And the first part of the webinar, forgive me if I repeat myself, you can feel free to fast forward to the part where our audio cut out. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about lesson planning today, specifically for teaching ESL, or English as a Second Language classes. We're going to go over the importance of having a really well-planned lesson, and so a good lesson plan, and then assessment effectively, and then use it to plan your next lesson. And then subsequently, we will get into classroom culture and classroom management and just ways and strategies to create a really nice environment for your students in your class. So with that said, and screen share my lesson plan here. So give me 1 minute. Okay. So essentially, lesson plan should start with a reflection. So let's just say it's Sunday night. My hypothetical scenario. It's Sunday night. I'm in Morocco. I'm teaching an English class at the Osru Center. On Sunday evening, I am going to fill out this reflection template for the week and also write my lesson plan for Monday. So the first part of the reflection is a long-term plan. So what's coming up? Like what skills do you need to prepare for, so what lessons do you need to prepare for in the coming week? What skills are students learning in the coming week? If you have any scheduled quizzes or tests, that's what I mean by assessment. Assessments are quizzes or tests. Do you have any scheduled assessments? And then you're going to briefly outline your upcoming lessons in this grid. So for this week, vocabulary on Monday, subject-verb agreement on Tuesday. I'll have a reading passage and a conversation on Wednesday. I'll review everything for the week on Thursday and then give a quiz on Friday. And you'll notice that my next week looks very similar. So that's our long-term plan. The second part of the reflection is really a place to think about you and, like, what are you doing well? What are you not doing well? If there are any students that you're particularly concerned about, or if you're, it's nice to put a student in that you're proud of, to have something positive in your reflection. So here in my general reflection, I'm teaching new vocabulary this week, and I'm anticipating challenges with pronunciation and with realistic applications. So to preempt those problems, I'm going to make sure to model pronunciation multiple times on my lesson, and to also give students several real-life examples, vocabulary applications, so the students understand exactly how to use and pronounce those words. Here I just wrote a little bit about what I'm doing well and what I'm not doing well. And that's just a great way to focus your own, instruction for that week. So here I am really struggling with time management. So I'm planning lessons but not getting through anything. So a strategy I'm going to use to preempt that problem is to use my timer more regularly. In this box, if there are any students that you're concerned about, here I'm concerned about 2 students, Faridun and Lola. They seem afraid to volunteer in class, and it's preventing them from practicing their speaking skills. So I'm going to try to give them some extra positive reinforcement and pair them with a strong speaker and group work to build confidence. So it's just a great way to think through those things, because in the moment when you're teaching, to do that. So I'm going to skip goals for growth because I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and it kind of relates to the strengths and weaknesses we spoke about. the data analysis section. So in this section, you list recent assessment data. So from a quiz or a daily assessment, which we call an exit ticket. So you're going to list recent assessment data and then kind of brainstorm and highlight who your high and low students are and how you can best support them. So here I just use a little bit of color coding. And I have Faradun is my lowest student in the class, and he's struggling with grammar and vocabulary. And I noticed that Sala is, there's a typo here, it's supposed to say Sala is strong in this area. Forgive me. So Sala is strong in grammar and vocabulary, and he got 100%. So already I'm going to pair them together for future group work, because I think that Sala could help Faradun a lot. And it would also help to push Sala. If he's acting as a teacher, he's going to, take on, some more intellectually challenging work in the classroom. This is also a great place to note any, observations you have about, any other observations about your students. So here with Lola, I'm noticing that she seems exhausted in class and she hasn't been completing her homework assignments. And maybe she's a good student to pull aside for like a one-on-one check-in and be like, hey, is everything okay? I noticed that you seem tired. Let me know what I can do to help. Or if you need help with your homework assignments, I'm happy to schedule a one-on-one meeting. So, it's just a great place to collect your thoughts about your students. So the assessment plan is our next. And essentially, this is where you're planning when you're going to get your next data. So here, I'm giving a quiz on Friday, and then my next quiz after that will be the following Friday. So just, you're working towards those. Okay, so that reflection, I took a little while to go over it, but that should take you about, 15 to 20 minutes to fill out on a Sunday. And I promise it will save you time and effort during the week when you're actually teaching. So let's go into the actual lesson plan. The actual plan that you will be as you're teaching. So I can't stress that enough. You should have your lesson plan in your hand, print it out if possible, or, if not, if you can't print it out, then at least write out your agenda for the day, because when you're teaching, you're doing so many different things at once that, it's really important to have your plan in front of you and to use it as a tool. So let's jump into the actual lesson plan here. So every lesson plan, daily objective. So your objective is the main point that you're trying to get across in your lesson. So it's the main knowledge or skills that you want your students to come away with at the end of a lesson. So my objective here is 80% of students will be able to define and apply new vocabulary, and the vocabulary, their adjectives, in a realistic setting. So I want my class to leave my class that day being able to define the vocabulary words and also use them in their daily lives. That is my objective. That's my goal for the day. So every objective should be really specific. It should be measurable. It should be rigorous and realistic. And that's a really hard balance to strike. So essentially, it should be something that you can attain in a class. Obviously, an objective that's like 100% of my students will be able to perfectly carry on a conversation in English. Like, that's not an attainable or specific objective, because A, probably all of your students won't be able to do that. B, perfect English is different to different people. So that's not a measurable objective. So just to be careful when you're writing your objectives that it's something that you can actually attain in 1 hour or hour and a half long class period. Okay, so once I've written my objective, the second thing that you should actually do after you write your objective is write the assessment. So I know it comes last here in the lesson plan, but that's actually the second thing that you should do when you're planning. So first, you plan out your objective, what you're going to teach. Second, you should plan out how you're going to assess it. So this is an example of my daily exit ticket. So it's like a daily quiz that you use to how well or effective your teaching was. So it's a simple exercise. The students, these are the vocabulary words and sentences and putting the correct word into the sentence. So this is a great way to know if A, your students have, they can define the words, and B, apply them in real situations. This will also take you about 5 minutes to grade. You're just going to check through everything, and then you have data that you can use to plan your next lesson. So if your students do really well on this, you can pick more rigorous words for your next time. If your students struggle with it, you know to stay on the same level or make your lessons a little bit easier. So we'll get more into the assessment component in a few minutes, but for now, I think it's good to just have an example of what a daily assessment looks like. So step 1, you're writing your objectives. Step 2, you're writing your assessment. Okay, so now you know what exactly your students need to be able to do by the end of class. So you know exactly what your students will need to do by the end of class. So now let's get into the activities that actually get them to that assessment. So what do we do in our lesson to get them to master that exit ticket? So every lesson should start with a warm-up. So this is about a 5-minute activity that's on students' desks when they get into class. And it's a great way to focus the class. So, the first 5 minutes, your students will just come in, and this will be waiting on their desks, and they'll just sit down and start working on it. Because, sometimes students might come in late. Sometimes you'll have to prepare, you'll have to get some sort of technology up and running. So having an activity ready to go for when students walk in is a great way to, focus your students right away and let you set things up. So my warm-up here is a free write. And remember, all of our ESL lessons should include reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So here's a writing exercise. So this is a Monday. So what did you do over the weekend? Write your answer in complete sentences and try to incorporate 2 to 3 of our English vocabulary words. So these could be words that I taught in, the week prior. So students are going to walk in and just start doing this right away. And then a tip for you. So wherever you see a tip that's highlighted in green, this is just a trick for you as a teacher. So during the warm-up, you should be circulating. So a good teacher does not just stand at the front of the room. You should be circulating and reading what your students are writing. If someone writes an excellent sentence, make a check or draw a smiley face or something like that. And that's going to empower them, A, to know, knowing what is correct. They'll know to replicate, whatever they did. And B, when you eventually call on students during the review, they'll have some confidence to answer and share that sentence with the class. So you might even want to tell your students, like, this is a great sentence. I'm going to ask you to share that with the class. And this is called a pre-call in the teaching world. So essentially you're pre-calling on your students. So as you're walking around and circulating, you're going to essentially pre-call students and also, jot down who is excelling and who is struggling. Okay, so you'll notice on the right here that I have timestamps. So you should use a timer while you're teaching. So this could just be your cell phone timer. It's just going to be a great way to make sure you stay on track during your lesson. So you're going to set a timer for 5 minutes for the warm-up. When that timer goes off, you're going to jump into a warm-up review. So it's always great to frame things positively. So you're going to say something like, great work on the warm-up, turn to the person next to you and share what you wrote. Talk about what you did this weekend. And make sure you ask each other questions and have a short conversation. So this is a great way to incorporate some speaking into your lesson. This is called a turn-in talk. So your students do their activity, and then they're going to essentially share what they did with their peer. So you'll set the timer again for 5 minutes. And as the students are talking to each other and sharing what they wrote, you will circulate and listen to the conversations. So after the 5 minutes together, and you'll ask specific students who did a great job to share a few of their sentences. And this is when you'll call on those students from the warm-up that you pre-called. So it's a great example of already we've incorporated writing and speaking, and we've already framed things really positively for students and tried to build confidence within the first, 13 minutes of the lesson. So it's a great way to start your class and just get everybody, warmed up and in a good mood. Great. So in my lesson, and you don't have to do this, but I think it's a great idea because this is an ESL class and speaking is perhaps the most important skill that they can come away with. In my ESL class, I'm going to have a daily conversation circle. So I'm picking, taking 15 minutes from every day. Students are arranging their desks into a circle. I'm setting my timer for about 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm introducing a discussion topic. And I want to stress that you should also participate in this conversation circle because it's a great way for your students to get to know more about you and your daily life. So my topic for the day is, who is a family member or friend who is important to you? Why is this important to you? And then I, as the teacher, would start the conversation and then ask students to continue the discussion. So as your students are talking, it's not only wonderful to be able to learn more about them, but also it's a great time to kind of take some notes on what your students need to work on. So you might make some sort of a template with different objectives in it for, grammar, word choice, register, intonation, speaking pace, etc. And you might just have your students' names also, and you might just check off who is doing a good job with what. So if Faridun, one of your students, is really struggling with his speaking pace, make a note of that in your chart. If another student, does a great job with intonation and, expresses themselves emotionally very well when they speak, then you might want to note that in your chart. So it's another great way to kind of gather some data while you're listening to your students speaking. So after 15 minutes, your timer will go off. You will put the desks back into the place they were. And then we get into the actual objective of our lesson. So students are warmed up. We've already had a lot of speaking and writing practice. And now we're going to get into the meat of our lesson, the vocabulary that's laid out in our objective. So, and this is perhaps the most important thing to take away from this lesson plan. Every good lesson has 3 parts. An I do, where you model knowledge or skills. A we do, where the class works on it essentially together. Do, which is independent work. So essentially, you're starting out by showing your student how to do something. Then in the we do, otherwise known as the guided practice, supporting your students and like coaching them through how to do something. And then by the time you get to the you do, otherwise known as the independent practice, your students are doing it independently. So for vocabulary, we're going to start by introducing 8 vocabulary words. I thought 8 words was an attainable number for a lesson like this. We don't want to give them too many words because then, your objective will be really hard to meet. In my lesson plan here, I script out exactly what I'm going to say. Obviously, when I'm in the moment, I'm not going to just read this verbatim. However, it's nice to have that if you lose your train of thought. It happens to all of us. So I'm going to say something along the lines of, so for the remainder of the class, we're going to learn 8 new vocabulary words, and we're going to focus on adjectives. Who knows what an adjective is? And then when your students will explain, it's a descriptive word, etc. To introduce the 8 new vocabulary words. So you'll notice here, I have flipped to the second page in your packet. So this is my lesson plan, but the students also have a classwork packet. So there's space for them to do their warm-up. And then there's also a resource for them to learn these new vocabulary words, which we'll get into now. So the students are now on the correct page of their classroom or classwork packet, and they're going to see these 8 words and a space to draw a picture, or you're going to show a picture that represents the word. So my words are exhausted, jealous, surprised, joyful, frustrated, hopeful, and lazy. To introduce each of these words, I'm going to say the word aloud and repeat it 2 times for pronunciation. I'm going to show a picture that represents the word, and I'm going to describe a scenario when I might feel that adjective. So example, I'll say something along the lines of, our first word is exhausted. Repeat after me, exhausted, exhausted. exhausted a few times. And then let's look at the picture on your handout for exhausted. And so the students will see that this picture is drinking coffee. It looks like me every morning. And then I'll say, I'll use it in a sentence. So exhausted means that you're very, very tired. I sometimes feel exhausted when I study for my exams very late at night and I don't get enough sleep. When is another time you might feel exhausted? You'll have a little quick conversation about times when you might feel exhausted. So this is just a great way to introduce each of these words. The picture helps the students to after the word, even if they can't understand in English. And then you're in the second part, when you're explaining that you feel exhausted when you study for exams late at night, you're giving a practical application of the word. So you will do this. You will pronounce the word, show a picture, and give an application for each of your vocabulary words. And that should take about 10 minutes. Obviously, I went through it more slowly for this purpose, but it should take about 1 minute per word to go through everything. So once you've introduced all the words, you're going to do a check for understanding for about 5 minutes. So again, this is a turn and talk. So you're pairing two students next to each other. And here you might want to pair low and high students together. So they're going to have little quick conversations. So they're going to talk about a time they felt frustrated. They're going to talk about a time they felt lazy. And they're going to talk about a time they felt joyful. And again, you're never just sitting at the front of the room. You're going to walk around and listen to their discussions. So your timer should be set for 5 minutes. And after the timer goes off, you'll go into the guided practice, otherwise known as the we do. So you've introduced the words, you've modeled how to use them. Now you're going to do something together, either in groups or as a whole class together, to practice using the vocabulary words. So the students will turn to the next page in their packet and they'll see a story that isn't completed. So a fill in the blanks kind of thing. So in my lesson plan, the students are going to work with partners and write the correct vocabulary word that fits on each line. You'll see that I have an answer key written in my lesson plan. And again, this is just for efficiency. When you're in the moment and you want to just like check things off on a student's page and get some in the moment data on how your lesson is going, this is a great thing to do. So this paragraph is essentially the activity the students are doing. And so they'll be working on this in pairs and you'll be circulating and correcting the papers in real time. So I want to call your attention to this point, more than that, this whole thing. So if there are any productive partnerships or really dysfunctional partnerships, you're going to want to be observant of that. So there might be two students that work really well together and you're going to continue pairing them together. There might be two students who really clash and you'll know to break them up for next time. So another thing is that if all the students are really struggling with 1 to 2 particular words, you might want to review these as a whole group before going into the next activity. Another tip, if students finish early, a good thing to always have on hand is like a pack of index cards. So you can say like, okay, until the rest of the class finishes, why don't you guys make some flashcards and quiz each other for the remaining 5 minutes? Because not every group is going to complete the activity at the same rate. So it's always just good to have a contingency plan. Okay, so that was the we do. So essentially group work that's going to help coach them to apply these new vocabulary words in a realistic setting. Okay. So I definitely recommend working in some sort of a game into every lesson, specifically, especially if you have a long lesson period. I know that at the ASRU Center, lessons are long, about an hour and a half, whereas in Zanzibar, your lessons might be only 45 minutes. So longer lesson, but you might not always have time for a game, but I recommend including one when you can. So here I have a quick round of Pictionary with the new vocabulary words. So I'm breaking students into groups of 3, giving each group a set of 12 cards with vocabulary words written on them. And I would probably make these the night before just on index cards. And then students are going to take turns So students will pick a card and their partner won't be able to see the word, and they'll try to draw something that represents it, and their partner will try to guess it. So it's just a fun way to review vocabulary in the middle of the lesson. And again, I'm going to have students do that for about 15 minutes in groups of 3. So already, speaking, listening, students have been reading. This complete reading passage and complete the story is helping them with their reading practice. And the warm-up involved writing. So we're really using all of the important ESL levers in this lesson. Okay, so after the Pictionary game is done, and again, you should be walking around and monitoring the game and helping students when needed. This is when you do independent practice. So students have had now 3 chances. They've had your teacher modeling, they've had the guided practice, the fill in the blank story, and they've had a game, Pictionary, to practice with the words. A chance for them to use the new vocabulary words independently. Essentially, the students are going to pick 5 of the 8 words. They're going to pick 5 of them, and they're going to write an original sentence for each word, describing a time when maybe they felt exhausted, surprised, lazy, etc. So you'll give them about 5 minutes to write those sentences, and they'll do as many as they can. So this is independent practice. So the room should be silent. They should be doing this totally independently. So after the independent practice, you're going to be always walking around and looking at your students' papers. And after the independent practice, you're going to move right into the daily exit ticket. So again, we already covered this. After you write your objective, you write your daily quiz or exit ticket. And at the end of the lesson, the students complete this kind of as a mini quiz. And it's a great way for you to see how you did as a teacher and see if your students actually mastered these words. So that should be about the last 10 minutes of class. And then last but not least, and I usually include this on the back page of an exit ticket, I have a sort of metacognitive reflection, which is essentially just helpful feedback for you as a teacher. The students will write what was easy about today's lesson, what was challenging about today's lesson, vocabulary words over the week, and any other questions or concerns that they might, your students might want to share with you. It's a great way to give students some anonymity. Not everybody wants to express that they don't understand something in front of a group. And this is a great way for you to, give students another way to share that. Okay, so again, and I stressed this in the beginning of our webinar that didn't pan out, this is an example of a very detailed lesson plan, a very well-planned lesson. So this is something to strive towards. But, we understand that this, it might take a while for you to work to this point, but this is just a sample of what a really well-rounded lesson plan looks like that uses writing, reading, listening, speaking, all in one class period. And it's a lesson where you can also collect really meaningful data and assess how your students are doing. You never want to get in a position where you're not sure if your students don't understand something. So again, this lesson plan, it's a resource for you. Highly recommend using this template. It will, you'll put a lot of work in up front when you're planning your lesson, but it will make everything go so much more smoothly in the moment, which is the most important thing. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And I'm going to switch gears and share about classroom management now. So first off, is the key to classroom management. So this really connects to the lesson plan that we just spoke about. Having a good lesson plan and keeping students challenged and busy is the best way to preempt any sort of classroom management problems. Anticipate you having significant classroom management problems. I think that every school that you're placed in is so excited to have you, and students are going to be on their best behavior. That said, keeping your students challenged and busy is the best way to preempt any problems. So where I have planning plus high expectations plus positive culture equals solid classroom management. So we're going to talk about and positive culture now because we already spoke about planning. So classroom management, if you think back to your own classes, I'm sure we've all had teachers where everything ran smoothly and you got through your lesson materials every day and you learned what you needed to learn. And then I'm sure we've all had teachers, maybe behavior was a problem, maybe things were a little too lax and people and students took advantage of that. So essentially, a way to avoid the latter scenario on the actual objective that you're trying to teach is to set a certain tone in your classroom. And the first step to doing that is establishing yourself as an authority. So obviously, as an leader, you're going to want to, be warm to everyone. You're going to want to welcome any chance to, engage in dialogue with your peers. But you're also going to want to take yourself seriously as an authority figure in your classroom. You are a native English speaker and your students want to learn from you. So, when you go into your classroom in Zanzibar, your students aren't your friends in that moment. They are your students and authority figure in that room. And a great way to show that is to use a really strong and clear voice and to be as precise as possible when you're explaining a concept. Scenario comes in very handy. If you are well planned, you're not going to ramble as much in the classroom. That's just a fact. So using a strong, clear voice and being well planned, if you can say something in 5 words rather than in 10 words, then, be as precise as possible. Conservatively. So we've spoken about this before. You're going to want to dress in a way that you would to, an internship, here in DC or in New York or wherever. So I would definitely dress in a business casual, dress business casual while you're no shorts, always wear pants, and, for guys, a button-up shirt, or for women, make sure that you're wearing a blouse that covers most of your arms. Some of your schools might require that you wear hijab, and, if you're uncomfortable with that, that's something we can talk about, but that is another of working and dressing conservatively. This 4th bullet point is important. Know what to share and what not to share. So it's a kind of a tricky line to tread. So obviously your students are going to want to know a lot about you. 5th bullet point is tied in as well. Know how much to share. Your students are going to want to know everything about your life and your opinions, but it's kind of wise in the classroom to stay away from politics, religion, gender issues, or anything too personal about your personal life. And I trust that you all have that discretion to know what to share and what not to share. At least build personal, appropriate relationships. So you're going to build really wonderful relationships with your students. But, again, your students aren't your friends. You don't want to show favoritism to one student over your others. Maybe your student might ask you over for dinner, and in that case, speak with your country coordinator about whether or not that would be an appropriate thing to do. It's happened in the past where our volunteers were invited to their students' homes and they weren't sure, what to do about it, if it would be crossing a line. And in that case, just reach out to your country coordinator or Ben or me. So kind of establish yourself as an authority figure worthy of respect in your classroom. Okay, 2nd step to kind of building that positive classroom culture, expecting 100% from your students. So this is huge and so important. Not all of your students are going to be at the same level, but that doesn't mean that you make excuses for students that are struggling. Believe that every one of your students is capable of learning English, and don't make exceptions. Don't say like, oh, Faridoon just really struggles with this. It's okay. You're not allowed to opt out or give up, because that sends a kind of a dangerous message to others. It says that you don't maybe believe that they can learn it, and that's not a good feeling for your student. And it also shows your other students that you are going to let things slide. So, and again, this isn't, you shouldn't be harsh or mean in saying this, but by, if you have a student that's struggling, maybe pull them aside for a one-on-one tutoring session and say, like, I know you can learn this vocabulary words. We're going to work together until you get it. And really expect that work ethic from your students. Having clear and firm expectations is really important. So I highly, highly doubt you will have any of these behavior problems. But if there is something, so for example, if you're trying to teach and a student interrupts you and it distracts you, you might pull that student aside and say, explain exactly your problem. Like, when you interrupt me while I'm teaching, it distracts me and it prevents your peers from learning. Please stop. You're going to need to raise your hand if you want to speak in class. And once you've addressed the behavior problem with the student, and if it persists, you should feel free to share that with the staff at your school. But again, this is just a way of setting guidelines for your classroom that ultimately will make your lessons more effective. If students are speaking out of turn and interrupting you, the rest of the class is not going to be able to learn. So it's just a way of, setting those really high expectations from the get-go. And last bullet point, allowing time for reflections. On my lesson plan, the reflection after the exit ticket's a great way to do this. It just allows students to think and take full responsibility for their own learning. So, give students time to think like, okay, what could I do better? What do I need to study at night to master this skill, etc. And last but not least, a great way to have excellent classroom management is to build a positive culture and a culture of trust. So positive framing is so important. So frame, even if it's a very tough task that you're teaching, frame everything positively. Like, stress how much their English will improve once they've mastered a difficult skill. When someone does something well, narrate it. Say to the whole class, I love how Faridun is writing his complete sentences with correct, punctuation. It's not only builds confidence for the student, but your whole class is going to see that if they do something well, you're going to compliment them too. And that feels really good for your students. Warm, firm balance, essentially, that's just kind of describing how your attitude should be. You should be warm to your students, but also firm and expecting a lot from them. And the last point, essentially, we all have wonderful parts of our personalities to share with our students. Maybe you're really energetic, maybe you're kind, maybe you have a great sense of humor. And use those things to your advantage as a teacher. Telling a joke or something really builds nice relationships with your class. Going above and beyond to help a student who's struggling with a one-on-one tutoring session kind of shows your students how much you care about them. And that will also help with your classroom culture and classroom management. But not least, I want to share a few resources for you. So Teach Like a Champion, it's a book and essentially a teaching strategy created by this man, Doug Limov. He works with Teach for America and a lot of charter schools around the country, working in low-income areas that are trying to bring more teachers in because there's high teacher turnover. And his resources are really effective, very, very good. And I gave you a website for a few of them that might be helpful in your classroom this summer. Ambassadors in the past has put on a few video tutorials in teaching English as a second language best practices, which I highly recommend checking out. So again, I'm sorry that the webinar didn't pan out. I hope this is a worthy substitute. And please reach out if you have any questions about the lesson plan. I know it's kind of daunting, but I promise that it's worth it. And if you have any specific questions, don't hesitate to email me. Okay, thanks. Bye.